right. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, so here we go. Wanted to take a second to let you all have a chance to download a document if you would like to do so. This is not at all a requirement, but this is the action plan document that is intended to help guide you through the process of starting to think about how you could integrate this concept of research as inquiry into your course or class session. So I don't expect that anyone will be able to complete the document, but having it for the session today might allow you to start writing down some notes and sharing your thoughts and ideas as we're going through. And then after the workshop, if you're interested, you can go ahead and complete that document, and that will give you something tangible that you can take away from this workshop so that you'll have a starting point in thinking about how you can integrate information literacy into your course. There is also an option on that worksheet. You'll see a link if you want to upload the document and get feedback. You can do that as well. I'm happy to share feedback on your plans and your thoughts about how you could integrate this concept into your class. So I'll give you just 20 seconds more to just let anyone who wants to download that document get it downloaded. And again, if you don't want to do that right now, or if you don't want to do it at all, that's fine. And we also will share the link to this afterwards. So if you'd rather just do it after the workshop, that is fine as well. So I'll take a pause really quickly. If there's any questions before we jump in, or any comments. Okay, and so that link is added into the chat box. Stephanie, if you could add that again, that would be great. Okay, there it goes. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and move on. Our outcomes for this workshop, first of all, I'm going to provide a basic description of the research as inquiry concept as that concept is described in the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education. We're going to talk about some student learning bottlenecks that may be related to research as inquiry. So places where students may get stuck or challenges that they might experience that could be related to this topic. And then we'll start to think about some initial strategies, activities, or assignments that might be helpful in supporting students to develop their understanding of this concept. I would like to take a second to just get an idea of how familiar everyone is with the Framework for Information Literacy. So I'm going to pop a quick poll up here. All right, so hopefully everyone should be seeing the poll. Just want to know how familiar you are with the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education. So we'll give it another 2 or 3 seconds. And go ahead and get ready to end the polling in 3, 2, 1. Okay. So I think the results are as I expected. Most people are not really familiar with the framework or only somewhat familiar with it, with a smaller number of people who are moderately or very familiar with the framework. So let me see, hopefully everyone should be able to see the results now. Right, and again, this is what I expected. The framework is, although it's been around for a couple of years, it's still a document that especially folks outside of the library world aren't always as familiar with. So I hope that those of you that are familiar with the framework will forgive me for taking just a second to describe what it is that I'm talking about. So the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education was published by the Association of College and Research Libraries in 2015 as a way to provide an expanded and updated definition of information literacy. So previous understandings of information literacy had been very skill-based. So being information literate was about being able to find, evaluate, and use information. The framework presents a conceptual view of information literacy, and it takes the perspective that there are core concepts that students really need to understand in order to be able to effectively engage with information. These core concepts are things that experts and scholars understand. They understand about how information is created, how information is accessed, how it's produced, how it's shared, how it's valued. But students may not have these same understandings. And it's this gap in understanding that results in a lot of the misunderstandings and frustrations that are experienced between students and instructors when we think about any type of research or inquiry-based assignments. So instructors have certain expectations based on the fact that they understand these sort of deep concepts about information. But students, if they don't have that same understanding of those concepts, many of the things that we ask them to do may not really make a lot of sense to them. So the framework highlights 6 core information literacy concepts that we think that it's important for students to understand in order to really be able to effectively engage with information. And one of these core concepts is this idea of research as inquiry. So, let me jump back a little bit. To provide a quick overview of this topic, I have just a really quick short video. It's only 1 minute and 24 seconds, and hopefully this will work. Go ahead and play this. When Charlie received the grade for his first college research paper, he was disappointed. His professor was also disappointed, since so many students seemed to misunderstand the purpose of a research paper. As Charlie talked with his professor, they both began to realize that they thought about research in different ways. For Charlie, in high school, research had consisted of summarizing information he found on a topic and reporting it to his teacher. However, his professor explained that she considered research as inquiry. For her, research is a process focused on problems or questions in her discipline that are unresolved. This process involves steps such as identifying a gap in the literature, developing a research question, and then using an appropriate method to develop a potential answer to the question. Often, she explained, the answers created new questions. For Charlie, who was just starting his academic career, this view of research was at first difficult to understand. However, as Charlie advanced in his major, he learned to think about research as more of an open-ended exploration whose purpose was to answer questions and create new knowledge. So as the video describes, the concept of research as inquiry holds that research is considered by experts and scholars as an iterative process that's really focused on asking questions or trying to solve problems with the recognition that finding the answers or finding a partial solution is often going to lead to new questions or new problems. So experts, scholars, researchers think about research in terms of their discipline as this process of joining in their discipline as part of this collaborative process, working to answer these questions, to solve problems, thinking about the unanswered questions in their discipline, the things that don't yet have a solution. And so it's this kind of collaborative ongoing process that is intended to help extend the knowledge in the field. Experts have this understanding of research as being this iterative and open-ended and often very messy process, right? Very ambiguous process where there's just debate and disagreement. And it's not really this straightforward process that's always going to result in one clear, perfect, right answer or right solution. For students, for novice researchers, this can be a very different perspective of research. As the video showed, Oftentimes it's in high school, what students learn to think of research is this process of, compiling information on a topic and then reporting that information to their teacher. And so this idea of thinking of research as this ongoing process that's really involves asking questions or seeking solutions may be a really different way to think about research. If students do start to develop this understanding of research as a process of inquiry, that may help them to really make sense of some of the expectations that we have when we give research or inquiry-based assignments. So, why they need to develop a research question. That's something that students often struggle with how they develop a research question, what good research questions look like. But as they start to think of research as this process of inquiry, they start to understand the need for research questions. Understanding the importance of patience and flexibility. I'm sure many of us have seen students, I know in the library world, we see students who, they do one search, and if they don't find the right answer right away, they change topics. Rather than recognizing that they may not find that right answer right away. And it's going to be a process of ongoing searching and ongoing, efforts to collect data or to do some type of experiment to develop those answers. So the framework actually outlines what they call knowledge practices, which are basically actions that students can take, as well as dispositions or ways of thinking or habits that students develop when they're starting to grasp this concept of research as inquiry. So I just want to highlight a few of those. These are not all of the knowledge practice or dispositions, but just wanted to highlight a few. So it's really important that students start to develop this understanding of research as this open-ended exploration and engagement. Rather than this closed-ended process that's always going to result in one correct or right answer. Learning the importance of seeking multiple perspectives when they are searching for information. Starting to recognize and value the role of patience, persistibility, flexibility, and coming to terms with the fact that their research results are often going to be very ambiguous. And not really something clear that one of their roles is to help make sense of those results that they find. Some of the knowledge practices, learning how to formulate research questions, especially in terms of thinking about this in terms of what are the gaps? What are the questions in my field or discipline that haven't yet been answered? What are the problems that don't yet have solutions? And I know that in my experience working with students, this has been a real challenge, especially I talk to a lot of graduate students, and making this shift to thinking about identifying their own question based on things that have not yet been found can be a real challenge for students. Learning how to use a variety of different types of research methods, knowing when different research methods might be used. This is also challenging for students. So as they progress, it's hoped that students will be able to start thinking about research as this process of inquiry, as this open-ended process, starting to ask more sophisticated research questions and learning how to use more advanced research methods. So quick summary, research as inquiry is this idea that research is not this simple, straightforward process, but it's this iterative and ongoing and messy process in which even if you find an answer, it's generally going to lead to new questions. And so this can create a lot of struggles for students in terms of the open-ended nature of research as academics think of it, learning how to identify those directions for their research, and learning how to use different types of research processes or strategies. Okay, so I will take a minute and stop here to see if there are any questions and anything that's in the chat box. Stephanie, is there anything that I have missed?
I don't think we've had any questions so far, but if anyone wants to drop any questions in now, we can address those.
And as you're thinking about questions, this also I think is a good time to have you think about your own situation and what challenges or frustrations do you see in your students that you think might be related to this concept? Or if you can think about this in a different way, once students really start to get this, what will make sense to them that we are asking them to do that maybe didn't make sense to them before? So I'll take a pause here, allow people to add any questions or thoughts that they would like to share to the chat box before we move on. So Teresa commented, searching for relevant secondary literature, wading through databases. Yes, definitely challenging for students. Often even understanding why they need to find that secondary literature. So Danny added, I search, I get stuff, it's good enough, but they're missing a lot of good stuff due to poor searching techniques. Definitely this idea that they're gonna just take the first thing that they find that seems to have an answer that might work. Megan added, understanding how contradictory results are two sides of a research question and not a case of a right versus wrong answer. That is a great point, Megan. You know, students are often looking for, they want to be right. And it's really hard to accept this ambiguous nature of their results and seeing that, you know, multiple perspectives can still contribute valuable points. Absolutely. Saida added, students find this process cumbersome. They told me multiple times that they get confused after reading few literature and don't know how to relate them together. Writing pro-con summaries rather than investigating a thesis question. Yes, absolutely. Kathy asked, can you elaborate any ideas you have for teaching this type of research inquiry to students remotely? We will talk about some sample assignments and activities at the end, and I think most of those could work in remote situations as well. Carol added some challenges, intellectual growth into ambiguity, nuance, also the time involved, capturing their interest, providing incentive when other things compete for their time and attention. So when they get it, they should be able to evaluate sources, identify potential bias. Yeah, all of these are great points. And I think one of the things that the framework really emphasizes is that oftentimes as scholars become experts in their field, these are things that they don't explicitly always tell students. So they become expectations of experts because this is how we think about research, and sometimes we don't always clearly, and this is not really, it's not a fault of ours, it's just that we don't see research from the same perspective as students, where we're coming from this at different angles. And so it creates those misunderstandings and misconceptions of here's how I think about research, but students have that very different view. So thank you everyone for sharing. And you can continue to add comments and questions into the chat box, but we will go ahead for now and move on. I want to make sure we don't run out of time. Okay. So I do want to take just a couple of minutes, and I think these are things that we've already been talking about, and you all are having these ideas in the chat box, so it won't take very long to highlight these. But just point out a few student learning bottlenecks that I see that I think may be related to this concept. If you're not familiar with this term, student learning bottlenecks is just a way of really thinking about those places within the research process where a significant number of students might get stuck, like sort of a barrier that some kind of misunderstanding or misconception that's preventing them from being able to move on in the research process in the way that we hope that they would. I just wanted to highlight a few of those, and specifically thinking about the purpose of research processes, developing a research question, and the need for patience and persistence. And again, this is one that I've already mentioned, but I wanted to highlight this again because I think that this is so important, is that these different perspectives that students and instructors often have on the purpose of research projects. There's some research out there I'd be happy to share with anyone afterwards, where the researchers have investigated the way that students think about research and what they consider the purpose of research to be. And those results are often very different from, you know, what instructors are hoping their students are getting out of research processes, right? So this idea that their role is to compile information on a topic and to report on a topic, rather than to engage in an active process of inquiry. And so highlighting this understanding and some of the activities that we'll talk about at the end will really be ways to get students thinking about how they understand research, and hoping to help them develop an understanding that more closely aligns with the way instructors think about research. Developing a research question. This is one of the most common research-related tasks that we ask students to do. And it's something that students can really struggle with. I know that in my experience, I would often ask students to develop sample research questions, and I would get very basic sort of factual questions like, oh, when was the first college football game, right? And, you know, questions that could be answered with a date or a fact, a definition, with a quick 30-second Google search. Those would be the questions that students would submit as a sample research question. And then I would talk to the students about that. And, you know, if that was your research question and you were writing a 5-page paper, what would you talk about in the rest of your paper? If, you know, you could answer that question in 2 sentences, and then what are you going to do after that? And so, but students would really struggle, even after going through an exercise talking about what good research questions look like. I would still get a lot of those more factual, straightforward, kind of closed-ended questions rather than the open-ended questions that we are looking for. And as mentioned before, this idea of research is about identifying gaps or unanswered questions in a discipline or field. That can be something that can be really challenging for students as well. And apologies if you see me pushing motions. My cat, of course, has decided that he wants to join the chat and he does not want to get down. So, come on. Sorry about that. So another bottleneck that I see again, one that I'm coming from my perspective as a librarian, we see students give up really quickly on a research project or process if they don't find right away a source that really seems to answer their question. And so this idea that they might have to be combining information from multiple sources to develop the answer rather than finding an existing answer out there, and seeing that this is a process where they might start out with a broad research question, then they do a little initial research, then they might need to go back and revise that research question and narrow it down and do more searching for sources. So learning to develop that patience and that flexibility that good researchers exhibit can be a real challenge for students. So I'll take another break there really quickly to pause to see if there are any additional questions that people have, or other ideas of bottlenecks that students may be experiencing that they think may be related to this topic. So maybe providing examples of good research questions and then explaining to them why it is a good question. Yeah, that's a good idea, Carrie, and that's something that I've definitely done with students before, is give them a bunch of research questions, good ones and bad ones, and compare and talk about both. So being forced to do research is not motivating. You need to want to find the answers. That's a great point, Brian, and that really goes to the idea of figuring out ways to engage students in the process and motivate them by designing research or inquiry-based assignments that will allow them to somehow connect it with their own life, if that's possible. A lot of times students get very generic research topics, and if there's any way possible that you can allow students to pick topics that they have a more personal connection with and questions that they really want to answer, I highly recommend that you do that. Okay, Nick added, similar to what we said, trying to find that one source with the one correct answer rather than seeing the current dialogue in the field. Danny added another bottleneck: format restrictions from the instructor may not match what's best for the student's research question. That's a great point, Danny. Oftentimes we do see, as librarians, students coming with research assignments that require them to use scholarly journal articles when it's a current research topic that there's not going to be scholarly journal articles on. So sometimes, although it's very well-meaning when instructors give those requirements on specific types of sources that students need to use, that doesn't always work out best depending on the types of research questions that students might have. And Carol added, students can feel overwhelmed, frustrated. Definitely. We all feel overwhelmed and frustrated. I know whenever I start any type of research process, I feel completely overwhelmed and frustrated and challenging. And knowing that it's going to take, weeks and months until I get to the end and write my paper, definitely a frustration. And, Kathy added, bottlenecks I've experienced, students do not understand how to manage search term queries and do not understand hierarchy of information, publications, search tools, databases, and academic research. Yes, so not knowing the right places to go to get the kind of sources that will help them start to develop their answers to their questions. Absolutely. Okay, I'm just gonna check the time real quick. All right, so I think we'll go ahead and move on again, but again, please feel free to continue sharing any questions or comments that you have in the chat box. So in this last part of the workshop, I want to talk about some strategies, activities, assignments that might be useful for helping students to develop an understanding of this concept. And these are going to be quick overviews of these strategies, activities, but I did want to let you know more detailed versions of almost all of these assignments are available. And so we'll send the link out to all of the workshop materials at the end. And if you go to that, you will be able to access a folder that has detailed versions of all of these assignments. So my first strategy, and any of you that attended the workshop that we did last week, you'll notice some similarities in terms of the strategies that I'm recommending. First of all, it's just starting small and really kind of explicitly addressing some of these things with students. As I said, the framework really highlights this idea that some of these things are things that instructors know, sometimes without even knowing that they know. And so the knowledge seems kind of hidden to students. And so some of the time, sometimes if we just take a little bit of time to really explicitly talk about these issues with students, it might be helpful. So a simple, very quick thing that you could do would be to just start out when having some sort of either individual or group reflection or some type of discussion, a think, pair, share activity, where you just ask students to think about what the purpose of research is to them. Or what might come to mind when they hear a phrase of research as a process of inquiry, what they might think about that. Just giving them a chance to share and then sharing your own perspective on what research is, starting that conversation so that they're starting to think about what research means to them. Another activity I do a lot with students is really just, it's very simple, but it's just a true false activity. Where I will give students a list of statements related to this idea of research. So one example statement would be, a good research question can be answered with a quick Google search. And then have them discuss, in pairs or small groups, which of those statements are true, which of those statements are false, and then discussing them together as a class. And this is something that could definitely be done through a Canvas discussion board as well. So it could be an in-class activity or an online activity. Another Really quick, easy thing that you could do would be to either show students the video that we watched earlier, or I give a couple other examples of videos that are on related topics there as well. And just have students write a quick 1-minute response to what that video is and how that fits with their own understanding of what research is. So again, just think like starting these conversations, helping students to start, and maybe they've never really thought about what they research meant to them. But just getting these conversations, I think, going can be helpful. Another strategy that I would recommend, especially this is in terms of developing research instruction. So handouts or instructions for research assignments or activities, using the strategy called TILT, which is transparency in learning and teaching. And this is a strategy that was primarily developed by Marianne Winkelmus. And what she argues is that student learning can be improved if we are very clear about what the purpose of any research assignment is, what the specific tasks that students are going to have to do, and what the criteria is. So how they will be evaluated and what they will be evaluated on. And I know that many of you are probably already doing this or doing at least aspects of this. But there are some examples, and I know Stephanie will share in the chat box some links to those examples of how you can really clearly spell out for students the purpose, the task, and the criteria for any particular research process. And one of the things that this is really helpful to is this is a very equitable strategy. This is something that is helpful to everyone, even the really good students, but also the students that may be struggling. Very clearly laying out those expectations for those research or inquiry-based assignments, helpful to all students. An activity that I think can be helpful, this is something that we do in one of the classes that we teach through the Teaching and Learning Department, an activity to help students learn how to parse a research assignment. So if you have a research or inquiry-based assignment that you're planning to give students, taking 15 to 20 minutes and having them sit there in groups or individually go through that assignment, highlight the key terms or components that they don't understand. There's some research out there that talks about this idea that a lot of the common terms that we use, like journal article, are ones that students aren't quite clear what we mean when we say journal article. Instructors tend to, if you have a chance to see multiple different assignment instructors, there's so many ways that instructors refer to peer-reviewed journal articles, scholarly articles, refereed articles, all of these different terms, the academic journal articles. So we all tend to mean the same thing, but we might use different terms. And so it can be very confusing for students if one assignment asks them to use scholarly articles and one assignment asks them to use academic articles and one assignment asks them to use credible sources, which may be scholarly but may not be scholarly. So having them highlight those key terms that they see in that document and writing a summary or giving a verbal summary of what they consider to be the goals and the requirements of that assignment can be really helpful to making sure that everyone's on board at the beginning and what they need to be doing. The link that I provided there, Understanding Assignments from the University of North Carolina Writing Center, this is a great resource. It has a lot of questions that students can ask themselves as they're going through an assignment, and sort of goes through the entire process of, here's my assignment, here's what I need to know to be able to do this assignment well. So I highly recommend that as a resource. Defining research. So again, this is similar to what we've already been talking about, but having an activity where students write out what their definition of research is, or verbally come up with this, share their definition in groups or pairs, and then together develop a group definition of research. And then the instructor can share their own perspective of research with the class and compare and discuss. I think another challenge with this, of course, is that research can mean different things in different fields. So this kind of activity can be helpful to get students thinking about what research means in that particular field or in that particular course, rather than just general understandings of what research is. Really quickly, I'm going to go back to that one. Just to share briefly, I was actually part of a research project that I did with some of my former colleagues, where we did a survey and we asked a bunch of students just to say, what does it mean to do research? And the results that we got were fascinating, and students came up with a wide variety of what it meant to them to actually do research. And so some students had very scientific sort of laboratory definitions of research. For some students, research was being in the library and looking at books. So they had really wide range of definitions of what it meant for them to do research. So kind of bringing some of those to the surface and thinking, using that to help have this discussion about, in this class or in this field, here's what we're thinking about when we talk about research, I think can be really helpful. Helping students to identify research questions versus regular questions. This is a simple activity that you can do, and I think this, I mentioned this in response to a question Carrie had, but providing students with a list of questions, some of which would be regular questions, so factual, simple, easy questions, some which would be research questions, and having them sort those questions into 2 different groups and use that activity to help discuss the characteristics of research questions versus regular questions. So research questions can't be answered with one quick Google search. They can't be answered with a quick fact. They require multiple sources of information to answer. So doing this activity, again, can be helpful for students as they're developing their own research question to see where theirs falls. And the link I have there, this is a link to a page in Choosing and Using Sources, which is a free textbook developed by the Teaching and Learning Department that talks about research versus regular questions and gives a lot of examples that you could use of those. So this is a similar activity, but one I think that is more specifically focused in the discipline and a way of helping students to start to recognize the types of questions that scholars in their particular field are asking. So with this type of activity, you could provide students with citations to multiple articles on the same or very similar research question. And the job of the students would be to review the articles, and you could either have them review all of the articles or assign a specific article to specific students. But to compile a list of, here's 15 articles or here's 10 articles, however many you want to do. And compile a list that the entire class could see. Here are all of the research questions. Here are real research questions that scholars in this field are asking. And have students analyze those and think about those. Can any of these questions be answered with a quick Google search? Do you think that any of these authors would be able to really find the one right answer to any of these questions? So having them have a chance to really see and identify the role that research questions play in these articles, that all of these articles that are reading, that the authors did have a question that they're trying to answer, and seeing what real research questions in the field look like, I think could be a really helpful exercise for students. This is a similar activity, but I consider this as more of a reflection and individual activity. So having students write a first reflection on, here's what I think research is, here's the purpose of research, here's the process. Then having them individually review articles, identify what the purpose of research in that article was, what the process was, and then write an additional reflection comparing their previous view of research with how that might have changed after reviewing several research articles in the field. And then one other activity, again, one of the things we mentioned is really challenging to help for students to develop research questions that are based on gaps or unanswered questions. So I think doing some type of group activity where students create summaries of the findings from several different research articles on the same topic, and then working together in pairs or groups, having them identify additional questions that they have things that have not yet been answered or solutions that still need to be developed. So working together as a group to get this practice and learning how to use existing research findings to develop new directions for research. So again, those are quick overviews of activities, and we don't really have time to go in depth into any of those, but you will have a chance to access more detailed versions of all those assignments in the additional material that we will send. So still got about 15 minutes, so I'd like to just pause here for a quick reflection and let you think about how you might plan to teach or incorporate research as inquiry. If you did at the beginning of the workshop download that action plan, this might be time to take a look at that and write some thoughts that you have on that plan. So I'll give you all a couple of minutes to think about this. And again, feel free to share any of your thoughts or ideas in the chat box. Taking a look at some of the comments. So we have a recommendation for choosing and using sources, a guide to academic research. And we do actually have a link to that book at the end of this presentation, and I think Stephanie can add that link into the chat box as well. So that is a free open access textbook that has been developed by the Teaching and Learning Department in the university libraries. That provides a lot of guidance on developing research questions. It basically outlines the entire research process and was really designed as a resource where instructors could assign just a chapter or even just a page rather than like assigning the entire book, and it's tried to be very practical. So that is a great resource if anyone is interested in that one. And Stephanie did add the link to that. So Carol added, might be useful to start with a 30,000 foot view. Ask students what it means that OSU is a research university. What do essentially all faculty do here when they are not teaching or preparing PowerPoints for lecture, and why is this important? I think that's a great idea, Carol. I really think that in a lot of cases, students don't know what it means that their instructors are doing research, how that plays into their role as a faculty member, as an instructor. So I think that's a great way to really get started, to having them think about research and what it means here at Ohio State, what it means to their instructors. Carrie added, another bottleneck in the health sciences is teaching students, especially undergraduates, the context of what we mean when we ask them to do research for a research paper versus doing research for an evidence-based practice assignment. Even the term research can be confusing to students. I think we need to teach students about the research life cycle and how evidence-based practice relates to research. Yes, that is a great point, Carrie. You know, there are different understandings of research across disciplines, and then there's the understanding of research as sort of informational research versus practice research, and really being clear to students what type of research it is that we're expecting them in the specific course. Carrie added, I think a glossary defining research terms that students will be expected to know for a class can be helpful. It can also link to resources for each definition where students can learn more about those definitions in the context of a discipline. That is a great idea. I love that idea. Providing students with that glossary. Here's for this class, here's what we're talking about research, here's these terms that you need to know. I love that idea. Mm-hmm. Brian added, scaffolded assignments, developing the research questions, searching the literature with lots of feedback to help keep them on track. Absolutely, that scaffolding is so important. And getting the idea that, you know, you can start out with a broad research question, you do your initial research, you get feedback, you narrow your research question a little bit more, sort of learning how to model that process for students. Carol also added, even clinical non-tenure line faculty do research and synthesize in order to teach. Absolutely. Danny echoed Brian. Of course, I work with scaffolding and found much better results in the end than just getting the final paper without interim mini submissions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is, you know, research is hard. It's very challenging, and giving students those steps throughout the process where they can get that feedback, make sure that they're not going off track, I think is so helpful, because it is a really difficult, challenging process. You know, we know as instructors, as teachers, that it's hard to research. And so, you know, it's even harder for novices who are just coming to understand this view of research and what their role in the research process is. You know, thinking of themselves, it will be something, harking back to the Scholarship as Conversation workshop, starting to learn to think of themselves as being capable of contributing to the conversations, the dialogue that are going on in their field is really difficult for students. And so any assistance that we can give to help guide them on that process, I think is really useful. So I know we're coming to the end of our time. So now that we've had a chance to think more about this concept of research as inquiry, I'd like to do another quick poll. Okay, let's see. How do I bring up this second poll? Sorry about that. Polling one, here we go. Polling two. Okay, so now that we've talked about this topic, how important do you think it is for your students to develop an understanding of research as a process of inquiry? Okay, so we'll give it another 2 seconds. Okay. So hopefully everyone should now be able to see the poll results, and I'm glad to see that most people find it very important that their students start to develop this understanding of research as a process of inquiry. That's great to see. That makes me happy. Okay, so Stephanie will put this link in the chat box as well. But if you do want to access any of the materials from this workshop, that link is available there. And what you'll find in those materials, you'll find this PowerPoint presentation. Once the video of this workshop is available, we'll add that in there as well. You'll find a PowerPoint on the framework for information literacy. So if you want more information about that, you'll find a list of all of the knowledge, practices, and dispositions. As I mentioned, I only talked about a few of them in this workshop, but you'll find all of those available in there. You'll find the action plan document. So if you want to go ahead and develop that plan of how you might think about using activity or assignment to help students develop their understanding of that topic, all of that is in there as well. So please feel free to take a look at any of that material. And just some additional links and resources. Again, Stephanie's already shared most of these in the chat box, but you'll be able to access them too through the PowerPoint framework for information literacy. If you haven't taken a look at that, I think it's a really interesting document. There's some quick videos there from Mary Ann Winklemus talking about each of the different stages of the TILT process. And also a link to choosing and using sources, a guide to academic research, which is a great resource for everyone. And then the last things that I want to mention, again, this is the second in the workshop series. So we will be having workshops every Thursday through July 2nd. So our workshop next week, the information literacy concept that we'll be talking about is information has value. So you can go ahead and, if you're interested, register for that. I do ask everyone to register for all of the workshops separately, since I know that not everyone will be able to attend all of them. And then if you are interested in having a deeper dive into information literacy, we do offer through the University Institute for Teaching and Learning, we offer a teaching endorsement. It is called Teaching Information Literacy, and it is a self-paced, fully online course that is designed to take about 10 to 12 hours that guides participants through the entire framework and then through the process of revising or redesigning a course or part of a course to incorporate, purposely and strategically incorporate information literacy concepts. So there's a lot more detail there in terms of course design, looking at the backward design process, walking through that whole identifying information learning outcomes, information literacy learning outcomes for a course, identifying activities and assignments, thinking about assessing information literacy. So that has a lot more information if anyone is interested in taking that course. The link is there. You can always, again, just email me and I'll be happy to enroll you in that course. Everyone who is eligible that does complete the course then can apply for that teaching information literacy endorsement. Right, so let me take one last look at the chat box. So, and I apologize, I just realized how dark it got it here. It must be very dark outside. And apologies if those of you that can't see me very well. Okay, so Stephanie has put a lot of links in the chat box. If anyone has any questions of those, let me see if there's anything that we have missed. So Kathy said, I use a mock poster session in first year writing classes that allows novices to role play subject experts and share their research with others in class. The Research Monster role play allows students to share research findings and test their research against that of others. That sounds like a really great activity, and I would love to hear more about that one if you're willing to share that. Okay. So yeah, if we have any last questions, please feel free to go ahead and add those into the chat box. Other than that, I have reached the end of my content for today. I do hope to see you all back again next week for the Information Has Value workshop. Or if you're interested in enrolling in the Teaching Information Literacy course, that would be wonderful as well. So I hope everyone has a great day. And again, please let us know if you have any questions or comments. We'd love to talk more about this. So thank you. Thank you all for the comments. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. If I can.